hey yo, hey yo, hey yo, hey yo. Crossbeats production.
Welcome back, you're here with Nate28 and this is Crossbeats production. So I want to show you guys this EQ, which is by Fabfilter. It's called the Pro Q2, and I find it to be one of the best EQs that I've used so far up to date. It does a lot of stuff that you would expect you'd want from an EQ. Some of them obviously do it, like for example the Isotope Ozone 7 or 6 or whatever. They have their independent plugins. If you've got the advanced version, it has an EQ which does a lot of stuff as well. But this EQ, I really like the way it functions. I just like the display that it has and stuff like that. So I thought I'd give you guys a product review and just a bit of a show and tell of what it's capable of in that regard, of just showing you the bands and stuff like that. So first off, the display or the interface, it is adjustable, so you can change the size to however you want it to be, small, big, large, whatever. And you can also go full screen. So that's that right there. It allows you to do that. The function with the full screen mode, it just gives you a good resolution to be able to see what you're doing and EQing things. So what's cool about this is it's kind of intuitive in that regard. So if you double click down here, it will automatically set up a low cut or a high pass, so allowing you to do that individually in each band that you set up. So you can do that, set them both up, and you'd have a low cut or a high cut. Each individual thing you click on, if you saw that just come up, then it gives you a little help button, so it tells you what they are. Basically, it explains it all to you. But if you just mouse over this, you can actually reduce or I should say increase the slope on the actual high cut or low cut, and it basically sets it up in a function where it allows the frequencies from here to be removed, and anything below that, if you're familiar with how these work, that's what it does. So that's one function that's got there. It's also got the ability to change into a shelf, so a high shelf, which you would see here. If I just increase the gain, it's like a shelf, or you could decrease the gain and that would remove out the frequencies. And that's really handy for removing certain stuff at the top or even at the bottom if you're doing that. So if you're going to do that on the same thing down here, you could obviously change that to a shelf, and that would just do the same sort of thing. So functioning as a shelf there, that's a high shelf. You could do that as a low shelf, which would remove the frequencies below that. So that's basically how that works. It's also got the same thing here. I'll just remove it back to the screen here so you can see everything that's going on. So it's got the ability to change the actual octave or the slope of that, so it's more of a natural slope or a harsh shelf I should say. So that's fantastic. So all of these settings here, they're all basically the standard things you'd see on an EQ, but the way it can do it is quite good in the regard of one thing I've discovered, at least anyway, with the bell. So it's got this little function here that's like a little cog thing. If you click on that, it actually explains to you what it does. So if you wait for it, it'll come up with the help thing, and it just tells you about how this is the bell filter, and the shape of the curve is more like an analog curve. And the way that it sort of does it, so if I just go onto the full screen again, just to show you exactly what I'm talking about. So if you just normally have a bell filter, let's remove that. So if you normally have a bell filter, the way you would adjust the Q, so the Q is basically the way that this adjusts to the width of the bell, basically. And they call it a bell because it looks similar to a bell in the shape of it. So the way it normally would adjust is like that. So it would be wide or narrow, and you would reduce or increase if you're doing that. And you would use that as according to the need of the actual track. But the function here with the cog is allowing you to do more of a natural curve. So when you reduce or increase, it actually has more of a natural bending curve. So it slightly reduces or increases the actual frequency amount in the curve, and it also increases the dB amount. So it could be, say for example, it's at 1.43, it actually increases or decreases, so now it's at 1.37. So it actually decreases the volume or increases the volume with the bell and the movement of the bell. So that's a handy function to have a more natural sounding, especially when you're reducing as well. If you're reducing EQ, it's more of a natural sounding thing than just the bell that moves in the shape of that, so outwards or inwards. So that's something that's really cool. I really like it because I've used it before on EQs. So I'll show you an example of it in just a second when I get to that. But I just wanted to show you the functions that this has first. So the other thing it's got is the mid side, or the left and right. So we'll go back to this screen here, and I'll just show you the difference between these. So left and right is basically, if you look at it as a stereo EQ, it removes all of the frequencies out of that area or increases all of the frequencies in that area. And the fantastic thing as well that you can do with this is use the piano roll. So if you click this little piano button here, it'll allow you to move that across in accordance with the key that you're in. Say for example you got the scale or C minor, you could just go for all the keys that are in C minor, and you'd know that there's certain keys within that scale that don't suit. Maybe the EQ would help you then to isolate frequencies that don't sit right in your mix. That would be one reason to use that. Otherwise you could use it for other things as well. So again, with the stereo there, you've got stereo, so then you've got mid and side, which is pretty much the mid frequencies. So for example, mono, anything that's in the mono spectral area. So you could have vocals, you could have bass, you could have a kick or drums or whatever that might be, that would sit in the mono. You could reduce out that frequency if you wanted to, and make that just the reduction and leave the sides alone. Otherwise, obviously the same thing could apply. Say for example you wanted to remove some of the stereo stuff out, which is what I usually do in mastering. So what I would do is change this to stereo. You could move then the frequencies up to, say for example, 110, 120, 140, whatever it is, to get rid of the bass out of that side and leave the sides for the top. And basically that would allow stuff in your lower frequency area to breathe more easily without having to choke up the limiter with side information as well. Also removing any phase issues out of the bottom as well that might help you in that regard. So again, this allows you then to reduce or increase the slope, so you can change that however you need. More natural sounding slope that I kind of use is around about a 12 or 24. That's if you want a natural sound. If you want to really remove stuff out, you'd go for a 96, which is kind of like a brick wall almost anyway. So that allows you to remove some of that stuff out. Outside of that, it's got the function here. Then if you double click, it has another function here for a notch. So what a notch is, it's basically as it suggests and as it looks. It allows you to remove specific frequencies out, and you can adjust the Q so it's really sharp or quite wide. So that allows you to get rid of harsh or annoying frequencies that may have somehow come into the mix or your actual stem that you're removing the EQ on. Next thing is bandpass, which as suggests is kind of like a filter where it isolates those frequencies in that band. So all the green section is where it's actually allowing that frequency to come through. All of this black section here, it's pretty much just cut out for the most part, that frequency. So that's kind of good if you want to use this to automate it, like maybe something in your track. You could use that as a filter. You could also use it as a telephone effect, I guess, if you want to. That's one other way of doing that effect. Again, same thing, it allows you to change the octave or the curve of that, the slope of it. That's really fantastic as well if you're looking at, say for example, a bell, and you want to use the bell as sort of like a notch. You can reduce it and make it more of a natural sounding EQ rather than a sharp sounding EQ. Whereas stuff like this, where it's quite sharp, it sometimes sounds a bit weird because it gets phasey, or it might sound harsh because you've removed too much of a certain frequency out. So that's fantastic there. It's got the tilt shelf, which is as you would suggest, it tilts and it's a shelf. So basically it's allowing the frequencies, so if I just put that back to 1, so it's allowing the frequencies at the bottom end to be increased and the frequencies at the top end to be reduced. Vice versa, if you shift it, it just basically does the opposite thing. So that's sort of really handy if you want to get stuff sort of more, I guess, balanced without creating too much mud. If you're doing it, sometimes it could be a negative thing if you use it like that, but it's kind of like the filter that you'd see on this Neve filter there, which is very similar to the way that works. It's actually 6 dB octave either side, and you can adjust the way that the frequency is affecting as well. That's kind of that same kind of EQ concept there. So that's what that is basically replicating right there. So that's what it looks like. That's how the interface works. That's how the EQ curves work, and mid-side mode. So I've explained that to you. It's got also this zero latency, natural phase, and linear phase. All of those you probably want to read about yourself so you understand how these affect phase in your mix. But generally I would leave it on zero phase or natural phase when I'm EQing in a mix. If I'm doing a mastering session, sometimes I might use linear phase, for example, to remove out low end or to adjust the low end because of the way that the phase works. That's something to be aware of. The other thing is it's got this pre and post section here, so you can see the pre and post. This is more for the EQ and EQ matching part of it as well. But the other part that it does have, and I'll just show you if I can just get it on my track. So let's just open this section up here, and I'll just remove the actual EQ filter. Show you, just move that. Okay, so let's just start up and play this track, and I'll just show you this symbol that I've got. So if you hover over with the mouse, you can see that it started to isolate and create a little bit of a diagram for me. So that's actually a feature there. So you just hold the mouse down over where the curves are, and it will actually give you a display of the actual EQ curve that you're working on. So that's handy to know, especially if you're working on something that's got harsh frequencies like what I've got here. It's got this section that's quite harsh, and it shows you then that's sticking out. I've already EQ'd that, that's why it's quite level with the other part of that. But it's a good way to isolate the EQ and see what it's actually done and see where you need to work on, so you don't have to worry about focusing on it while it's moving up and down really fast. Again, you can adjust the speed of that anyway, so you can basically in here you can adjust the resolution, so it's high, low, medium, maximum. You can adjust the speed of the EQ so that moves quite slow. So if I just show you that, so now it's moving slower. So that's the way that that would work. I just usually have it on fast or very fast so I can see what's going on. But very fast will do. So that is that function there. It's got this other function here, which is basically, if you look in the instructions, it tells you what it is. So freeze enables the analyzer, it takes the maximum of all measurements and pretty much gives you the even amount of the spectrum there. So just basically, like I said, you can toggle over all of the settings there. If you just leave it on there for a minute, it will give you the help function or the help of what that is. So the next thing here, it's got an auto makeup gain, which is fantastic if you're looking at EQing some stuff out and you don't want to lose too much of the loudness of the volume of that, but you want to remove a certain frequency out. So that's good to have that as setting, an auto makeup gain. You can adjust the amount that it has as well in makeup. It's got a phase flip there, so it allows you to flip the phase basically. So if you've got something that's out of phase, you can put the EQ on it, flip that, and it should then put it back into phase with the other instruments. So then it's got a bypass, which is a bypass for the EQ altogether, and this function here, which allows you the metering on the side. So that's the basics of this EQ. It's such a great EQ if you're looking at using it for mastering in that regard, because like I said before, you can just isolate one thing as mid if you want to reduce the mid out there, and if you want to reduce the sides, you could certainly do that as well by using a low cut, and then you can reduce all of the side information out of that. So that's a really handy function to have with mastering as well, if you want to be able to do mid-side processing, which is what I do a lot of, and I usually use the Isotope Ozone 7 EQ for that as well. But yeah, so this is the quick overview of this EQ. It's definitely a great EQ if you have the money to spend on it, but if you don't, don't go out of your way to spend it. If you don't have it, obviously just work with what you have, but eventually when you do have the facility, or you can facilitate the purchase, it's definitely something that you would want to look at. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I'm going to do a next video on EQs I used in 2017. Obviously this is one of them. The other EQ that I would normally use is, as I said, there is Ozone 7, the EQ that it comes with that, and a couple of EQs, other ones as well. So I'll end this one now, and hope you guys enjoyed this video, and peace.
Hey yo, hey yo, hey yo, hey yo. Crossbeats production.